Pour yourself whatever you're drinking right now and look at it for a second, because there's a decent chance it's the same thing I want to talk about tonight. Not soda, not alcohol, not anything with a warning label. I'm talking about the drink half of you have in the refrigerator right now, the one you reach for because it feels like the responsible choice, the one with zero sugar or antioxidant rich on the label, the one you'd never think to mention to your doctor because, why would you, it's just tea. Here's the number I want stuck in your head before we go any further. In a published medical case report, a man in his 50s walked into a hospital with kidney failure so advanced he needed dialysis. And the cause wasn't alcohol, wasn't diabetes, wasn't a medication. It was roughly a gallon of iced tea a day, for years, because he'd read that tea was good for him and decided more must be better. That case made it into the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm going to walk you through exactly how that happens, and more importantly, where the line actually is, because the honest answer is not never drink tea again. It's much more specific than that, and much more useful. Stay with me, because by the end of this, I'm going to show you the one number your doctor can check with a simple urine test that tells you personally whether this applies to you at all. And I promise you it is not what most people expect. I'm Dr. Lim. I've spent more than 15 years in internal medicine and nutritional biochemistry, which is really just a formal way of saying I study what food and drink do to the body at the level of cells and chemistry long before you'd ever feel a symptom. I'm not here to sell you a supplement, and I'm not here to scare you off tea. I drink tea most days of my life. I'm here to walk you through the actual research on one specific drinking habit, so you can make an informed decision instead of an accidental one. Let me give you 60 seconds on your kidneys, because nothing I say after this will make sense without it. You have two of them, each about the size of your fist, sitting just under your ribs on either side of your spine. Right now, while you listen to me, they are filtering your entire blood volume roughly once every 4 to 5 minutes. Every single day, they process about 180 liters of fluid. Think of a small bathtub. And from that, they decide, drop by drop, what your body keeps and what it throws away. Waste products, excess minerals, anything you don't need gets pushed out as urine. One of those waste products is creatinine, a byproduct of your muscles breaking down and rebuilding, and your kidneys clear it out at a remarkably steady rate, which is exactly why doctors use it as a proxy for kidney function. When creatinine creeps up on a blood test, it usually means the filters are working a little less efficiently than they used to. And here's the part that matters most for tonight. The kidneys have no pain receptors for this kind of slow damage. You cannot feel filtration slowing down. You cannot feel a crystal forming in a tubule. The first sign most people get is a number on a lab report, sometimes years after the process actually started. So before we get into this drink specifically, I want to hand you one idea to carry through everything I say tonight because it's the lens the whole episode sits inside. Most of what damages the kidneys quietly isn't the food we already suspect. It's the food we've stopped questioning, the thing we drink by the gallon because somewhere along the way it earned the label healthy and we never revisited that label again. In Korean medicine, there's an old principle, yaksik dongwon, food and medicine share the same root. And the idea isn't that certain foods are magic. It's that almost anything, taken in the wrong amount or the wrong context, stops being medicine and starts being a burden. A cup of tea with a meal is one thing. A gallon of it all day in place of water is a different substance entirely, even though the label on the box hasn't changed. Keep that distinction in your head, amount and context, because every single thing I tell you tonight orbits around it. Now let's get into the mechanics of how a completely ordinary drink taken in an extraordinary amount ends up on a kidney biopsy report. The first thing you need to understand is oxalate. Black tea, the base of virtually every iced tea, sweet tea, and bottled tea on the market, is naturally high in a compound called oxalate. Oxalate is a molecule that shows up in a lot of plant foods. Spinach and rhubarb are famous for it too. On its own, oxalate isn't some rare toxin. Your body handles small, ordinary amounts of it every day without issue. The problem starts when oxalate levels in your urine climb high enough, for long enough, that it binds with calcium and forms sharp little calcium oxalate crystals. In small amounts, your kidneys flush those crystals out. In large, sustained amounts, those crystals can lodge in the tiny filtering tubules of the kidney and cause direct physical injury. A condition with a real name, oxalate nephropathy. Black tea isn't the only oxalate-rich drink out there, but because people drink it by the pitcher rather than the cup, it's the one most likely to push someone's daily oxalate load into dangerous territory without them ever realizing it. Here's why that's easy to miss. Nobody sips a gallon of tea in one sitting and feels anything. This is a slow accumulation, cup after cup, day after day, month after month, which is exactly the kind of damage that never announces itself until a routine blood test comes back different than it used to. So, what should you actually do with that information? Not panic over your afternoon cup of tea. Pay attention to volume. If you're someone who brews a large pitcher and treats it as your main fluid intake for the day, several large glasses, refilled without really counting, that's the pattern worth reconsidering, not the occasional cup. Second on this list, and closely tied to the first, using tea as a replacement for water. This is where the marketed as healthy part of tonight's topic really bites. Tea has no calories, no obvious sugar in its unsweetened form, so it feels like a virtuous swap for water, hydrating and healthy at the same time. But tea is a mild diuretic because of its caffeine content, meaning it makes you urinate somewhat more than the same volume of plain water would. When tea replaces water as your primary fluid source, two things happen at once. Your overall water intake often ends up lower than you think, and the oxalate you're taking in becomes more concentrated in less diluting fluid. Concentrated oxalate in a smaller volume of urine is precisely the condition under which calcium oxalate crystals are most likely to form. It's not the tea alone, it's the tea instead of water, day after day, that changes the math. The fix here is almost embarrassingly simple, which is exactly why nobody does it. For every glass of tea, have a glass of plain water somewhere in that same day, and let water, not tea, be your default when you're just thirsty and not particularly craving anything. Third, and this is where the healthy marketing gets genuinely misleading, bottled and fountain iced teas. Walk down any beverage aisle and you'll see antioxidant, no artificial flavors, sometimes even detox printed across the label of a sweetened iced tea. Read the ingredient list though, and you'll usually find added sugar or high fructose corn syrup, and very often phosphoric acid or citric acid used as preservatives and flavor enhancers. None of this is oxalate, but it adds a separate burden. Chronic excess sugar intake is independently linked in large population studies to a higher risk of declining kidney function over time, and it does the kidneys no favors alongside an already high oxalate load. This is the item most people wave off, because a healthy bottled tea doesn't look anything like a soda. Nutritionally, in the amounts some people drink it, it can behave like one. The action here is simple. Check the label. If sugar shows up in the first 3 ingredients, you're not drinking a health drink. You're drinking a sweetened beverage that happens to be tea flavored, and it belongs in the same mental category as any other sugary drink. Fine occasionally, not a daily habit. Fourth, and this one surprises almost everyone, tannins and mineral absorption. Tea, especially black tea, is rich in compounds called tannins, which bind to certain minerals in your digestive tract, most notably iron, and reduce how much of it your body actually absorbs. This isn't a kidney damage mechanism on its own, I want to be precise about that. But for someone over 50 who's already managing borderline anemia or taking an iron supplement, drinking tea with every meal can quietly undercut the very supplement they're taking. It's a smaller piece of the puzzle than the oxalate story, but it's part of the same larger picture. This drink is not nutritionally neutral just because it has 0 calories. If iron is something your doctor is watching for you, the simple move is timing. Have your tea an hour or so away from meals or supplements rather than alongside them, so the tannins aren't competing with your iron absorption in the same window. And now the one most people don't see coming, the reason I opened this whole episode the way I did: medications. If you're over 50, there's a real chance you're on a diuretic for blood pressure, or you take an anti-inflammatory like ibuprofen fairly regularly for joint pain. Both of those independently put a small amount of extra strain on kidney filtration, diuretics by shifting your fluid balance, NSAIDs by affecting blood flow within the kidney itself. Neither one is inherently dangerous at normal doses. Millions of people take them safely every day under a doctor's guidance. And I am absolutely not telling you to stop a medication your physician prescribed. But layer a very high sustained oxalate load from a gallon-a-day tea habit on top of a system that's already working a bit harder than usual, and you've stacked several small burdens on top of each other rather than just one. That's precisely the picture in the case I described at the start of this video. A person who wasn't reckless, who was doing what felt like the healthy thing, whose kidneys simply had more asked of them day after day than they could keep up with. I want to say something plainly here because it matters more than any single fact in this list. Your kidneys don't shout. They whisper, for years, before a lab number finally moves enough for anyone to notice. That's the whole reason this episode exists. Let me tell you about a patient I'll call Grace. 62 years old, recently retired, genuinely proud of how much she'd cleaned up her diet in the last few years. She'd cut soda entirely, replaced it with what she called just tea, always tea. Iced in summer, hot in winter, a large pitcher brewed most mornings, and refilled through the day. Her yearly blood work showed her creatinine had crept up slightly 2 years running. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would have set off alarms on its own, but enough that when we sat down and went through her actual daily intake together, the tea pitcher was the thing that stood out. Not because tea is dangerous, because she was drinking almost nothing else. We didn't take tea away from her. We added a water bottle she kept next to the pitcher, alternated glass for glass, and switched 2 of her daily cups to a lower oxalate herbal blend. 6 months later, her numbers had settled back toward where they'd been years earlier. What struck me most in that follow-up visit wasn't the lab result, it was what she said to me. It felt like something she'd added to her health, not something she'd been told to give up. That's the whole spirit of what I want tonight's episode to be for you too. Not a list of things to fear, but a short set of adjustments that let you keep the thing you enjoy while taking the actual risk out of it. So, here's how I'd put this into practice, starting tonight, in plain terms. First, know your own volume. If you can't roughly estimate how many cups of tea you drink in an average day, that's worth tracking for a week because most people are surprised by the real number once they count it. Second, make water your default and tea your addition, not the other way around. A glass of water for every glass of tea is a genuinely easy habit to build. Third, read the label on anything bottled because antioxidant-rich and loaded with added sugar are not mutually exclusive, and the marketing on the front of the bottle is not the ingredient list on the back. Fourth, if you take iron, keep a little distance between it and your tea. And fifth, and this is the one Korean tradition actually offers something useful here, not as folklore but as a genuinely lower oxalate practical option, consider rotating in a roasted grain tea like boricha, made from roasted barley which Koreans have brewed for centuries specifically as an everyday household drink served warm alongside meals rather than iced by the gallon. It has essentially none of the oxalate concern that black tea carries. It's naturally caffeine-free, and it's traditionally sipped in modest cups throughout the day, rather than chugged as a water substitute, which frankly is the whole behavioral fix wrapped into one habit. I want to be clear though that I'm not telling you this because it's Korean and therefore automatically safer. Plenty of traditional Korean foods carry their own real risks. Fermented dishes can be extremely high in sodium, for instance, and I'd tell you that just as plainly. I'm telling you about boricha because the specific chemistry of roasted barley genuinely happens to solve the specific problem we've been discussing. Now, a few honest limits on everything I've said tonight, because general guidance is never the same thing as guidance for your specific body. If you already have reduced kidney function, are managing kidney stones, or are on dialysis, oxalate intake matters to you at a much stricter threshold than it does for someone with healthy kidneys, and you should be having this exact conversation with your nephrologist, not learning it from a video. If you're on blood thinners, a diuretic, or any regular anti-inflammatory medication, mention your actual daily fluid intake, tea included, at your next appointment, because it genuinely helps your doctor interpret your labs correctly. And if any of this has made you curious about where you personally stand, there is a simple, inexpensive test, a 24-hour urine oxalate collection that your doctor can order, and it will tell you specifically whether your own oxalate levels are anywhere near a concerning range. That test is more useful to you than anything I can say in general terms, because it's about your body, not the average body. And to be completely clear about something important, nothing in this video is a reason to reduce your water intake, skip a prescribed diuretic or blood pressure medication, or avoid a screening test your doctor has recommended. If anything, better hydration is the single easiest fix available to almost everyone watching this. I'll say the same thing I always say at this point in an episode. Everything you just heard is educational information based on published research, not personalized medical advice, and it's not a substitute for a conversation with your own physician or a registered dietitian, especially if you're managing an existing kidney condition, you're on dialysis, or you take blood thinners. Use this as a reason to ask better questions at your next appointment, not as a replacement for it. Let's bring it all the way back together because I don't want you leaving this video with 5 disconnected facts. The oxalate naturally present in black tea can, in very large sustained amounts, form crystals that injure the kidney's filtering tubules directly. Using tea as your main fluid source instead of water concentrates that same oxalate and compounds the problem. Bottled and fountain versions often carry hidden sugar that adds its own separate burden. Tannins can quietly undercut iron absorption if you're managing anemia. And for anyone already on a diuretic or a regular anti-inflammatory, a heavy tea habit is one more small load stacked on a system already working a bit harder than usual. If you only change one thing after watching this, make it the simplest one: a glass of water for every glass of tea, starting today. Your kidneys don't shout. They whisper for years before anything changes on paper, which means the best time to listen is now, while the whisper is still all it is. Tell me in the comments, were you the gallon-a-day tea drinker, or has this always just been a cup with breakfast for you? I read every single comment, and I'd genuinely like to know how common this habit actually is among people watching. If this was useful, subscribe, because this channel exists to bring you real sourced information about aging well after 60. No fear, no supplements to sell, just the research and what it actually means for your body. And if you want to know what's quietly working against your blood pressure next, stay close. Next week, I'm walking you through 5 everyday drinks that raise it far more than the salt shaker ever does. I'll see you then.